Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Jeff
And not Jeff.
are here to bring you another spectacular episode of Exit the Norm. So today we're in Manchester, New Hampshire, and more specifically, we're at Merrill Cemetery. We're going to tell you the story of a pretty famous Manchester resident who's buried here, Mr. Commodore Nutt.
For all of you longtime Manchester residents, you might already know this story. However, for some of you newbies, you may not. However, if you've watched something such as, The Greatest Showman, that might help out a little bit.
Yeah, in fact, you've probably driven by this cemetery and not even realized it was here. It's actually right near the mall in New Hampshire. It's across the street from Barnes & Noble. The Olive Garden and Chunky's are behind us. And here you have Commodore Nutt buried right here.
So before we take you on this magical journey, make sure you do like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you think about what we're doing here.
George Washington Morrison Nutt was born on April 1st, 1848, right here in Manchester, New Hampshire on his family's farm. In fact, there's a body of water here in Manchester named after George, Nutt's Pond. We took a little walk around the pond after learning the story of George. The fifth and youngest child of Rodneyia and Maria Dodge Nutt, George went on to achieve international fame when he teamed up with the greatest showman himself, Mr. P.T. Barnum. Born with a form of dwarfism, George only grew to a height of about 36 inches. So with his brother, Rodneyia Jr., who was also a dwarf, he began performing song and dance routines in 1861 as part of a local circus here in Manchester, under the leadership of William, Uncle Billy, Walker. In December of 1861, 13-year-old George crossed paths with P.T. Barnum while visiting the American Museum in New York City. Barnum was immediately drawn to Nutt and signed him and his brother to a handsome contract, which included a salary, food, lodging, clothing, travel expenses, and much more. Barnum even agreed to give the brothers a carriage complete with ponies after 5 years. Barnum gave George the stage name Commodore Nutt, a name he kept for the remainder of his life, and even dressed him in naval attire. Barnum even had a walnut-shaped carriage built for Nutt, which he and his brother would drive around town promoting the act. He was billed as the $30,000 Nutt because that's apparently how much P.T. Barnum had paid to get him to perform at the museum. Nutt was eventually paired up with another famous dwarf at the time, General Tom Thumb. Thumb had already been singing, dancing, and performing comedy routines around the country before he was introduced to Nutt. In fact, some people thought that Nutt was actually Tom Thumb in disguise. Thumb and Nutt were not necessarily the best of friends. The two men were in a constant battle to win the affection of another dwarf entertainer, Lavinia Warren. Nutt had a crush on Warren, but Thumb had fallen in love with her the first time he saw her. So basically, Thumb had to come up with a plan to be with her. He told Barnum that he'd marry Warren in a public ceremony. Barnum agreed because he knew that such a spectacle would make him a lot of money. Nutt and Thumb even had a fist fight over Lavinia one day at the museum. Eventually, Nutt agreed to be the best man in what was dubbed the fairy wedding. Barnum then encouraged Nutt to marry Warren's sister, Minnie, but he refused. Apparently the love triangle did quite a number on him. It's pretty sad. The wedding of Thumb and Warren was so successful, though, that Barnum decided to send the four on a worldwide tour. They traveled to Japan, China, Australia, Russia, France, England, and many more countries. Nutt left Barnum in 1872 after the two men had a disagreement. He then tried to start his own traveling show and theater, along with a number of other ventures. but sadly, he was not very successful with any of them. In 1879, he finally decided to get married. He married a woman he met while on the road, Miss Lillian Elston. The two moved to New York. Then in 1881, Nutt was stricken with a case of Bright's disease, or nephritis, which is basically an inflammation of the kidneys. He died after 2 months, and his body was sent here to Manchester to be buried alongside his parents. He rests in between his mother and his father. Rest in peace, Commodore. Our search for information about Commodore Nutt brought us to a couple of different places in Manchester. The first one was here, the Manchester Historic Association. It's here where you can find a number of documents and artifacts and everything else associated with Commodore Nutt and his family. The other place we visited was the Millyard Museum here in Manchester. There's actually a special exhibit right now about Manchester's urban ponds, past, present, and future. And back here in the back of the exhibit, there's a section about Nutt's Pond. Here you can see a costume that Commodore Nutt wore. There's a picture of the fairy wedding. There's some paper dolls that were made in the image of Commodore Nutt. There's even a cardboard cutout here of Commodore Nutt, so you can see like how you stack up against the Commodore. And then you've got some pictures of the pond during its heyday when people would go swimming there. It's a pretty cool exhibit if you get a chance to check it out. Alright, hopefully you enjoyed this latest act of Exit the Norm.
If you haven't already, make sure you do like, subscribe, and comment. Actually, let us know what your favorite circus act was down there.
Alright, we'll see you later.